New Deep Dive.
Right. Today we're pulling back the curtain on one of the tech world's really big strategic gambles. Welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging into the high-stakes world of semiconductor manufacturing. Specifically, we're looking at a critical decision from Qualcomm.
Ah, yes, Qualcomm, the absolute powerhouse in chips.
Exactly. They're facing this monumental choice for their next flagship chipset, the Snapdragon 8 Elite Generation 2. This chip, well, it's destined to power the Samsung Galaxy S26 Ultra, which everyone's waiting for. And the central mystery, for you listening and for us, is Qualcomm going to use just one manufacturer, or are they going to split the work between two?
This decision is, it's so much more than just picking a supplier. It really is. It's like a multi-layered chess match. It affects global supply chains. It shapes tech advancement. And yeah, ultimately, it dictates how well the actual device in your hand performs. This isn't just about specs on a sheet. It's this really intricate dance of innovation, risk management, and huge global strategy. Basically, who wins the next round in the silicon race?
Okay, so let's unpack this idea of dual sourcing then. On the surface, it sounds like a smart hedge, right? You get two separate companies to make the same chip design. And here, we're talking about the big players. Taiwan's TSMC and South Korea's Samsung Foundry. But, if it's such a great idea, why isn't everyone doing it all the time? Especially after all the supply chain chaos we've seen lately.
That's a really good point because the theoretical advantages are definitely clear. You get leverage in cost talks, you diversify your supply chain, which lowers risk. You get a buffer if one supplier hits, say, technical problems or capacity issues. But the real challenge, the sort of deep dive insight here, is that it adds massive complexity. Think intellectual property management. Managing two different production flows. It's like having two slightly different secret recipes for the same cake. Getting the actual benefits is often way harder than it sounds on paper.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you touched on something key there, because the real tightrope Qualcomm is walking involves these, well, fundamental differences in how they make the chips. TSMC is apparently set to use its proven tech. That's their third-gen 3-nanometer process. Reliable stuff. But Samsung, they're aiming higher, maybe riskier, using their brand new 2-nanometer process. And that features something called gate-all-around transistors, or GAA.
Right, GAA.
For anyone not familiar, think of GAA as like completely redesigning the tiny tunnels electrons flow through it in the transistor. It gives much tighter control, less current leakage compared to the older FinFET designs. The promise is a big leap in efficiency and power.
And that brings up a really important question for you, the person actually buying the phone. The theoretical promise of Samsung's GAA is definitely exciting. I mean, boosting performance and efficiency, that's the dream. But here's the potential catch. If they do use both foundries, well, different units of the same phone, the Galaxy S26 Ultra, could perform differently. We're talking potentially noticeable differences in speed, battery life, even how hot the phone gets, all depending on whether TSMC or Samsung made the chip inside.
And making all this even more complicated is one of the most basic and sometimes frustrating parts of making chips. Production yield. Simply put, yield is just the percentage of working chips you get from each silicon wafer. It's like baking, right? How many good cookies versus burnt ones?
Exactly. And this is where you see a really stark contrast. And it explains a lot about Qualcomm's maybe hesitation. TSMC, they've really nailed this. They get stable, commercially viable yields over 70% on their advanced nodes. That's the industry term for these tiny manufacturing processes. Samsung, on the other hand, well, they've had more reported struggles, especially pushing the boundaries with GA and now 2-nanometer. Early reports, and these are just reports, mind you, mention yields anywhere from a pretty tough 30% up to maybe 50%. It's just incredibly hard to get high yields when you're working at scales close to individual atoms. Even one tiny defect can kill a chip.
Wow. Okay, think about what that means practically. For these huge companies, and yeah, for you, if Samsung's only getting, say, 30 to 50% good chips,
Yeah.
that means almost half of everything they make could be defective, unusable.
Right.
That blows up costs. It creates massive logistical nightmares. It really threatens your ability to compete if you need twice the factory space just to get the same number of working chips. It's a massive risk.
A huge risk.
So Qualcomm's stuck between this proven giant, TSMC, and this ambitious underdog, Samsung. And the rumors about what they'll actually do have been all over the place. It's been a real guessing game. Initially, most reports suggested Qualcomm had kind of given up on dual sourcing for this chip. They were going all in with TSMC. But then some influential analysts in Asia, particularly the Chinese commentator Digital Chat Station, kept saying no. The Samsung version, codenamed SM8850S was still happening.
Right.
Maybe just scaled back a lot.
And there's another really compelling piece to add here. Context from the Korean business media, Say Daily specifically. They reported that Samsung's facility in Hwaseong, the S3 line, was only allocated about 1,000 wafers per month for Qualcomm's project, 12-inch wafers.
Okay, 1,000 wafers. How much is that really?
Well, put it this way, that factory's total estimated monthly capacity for 2nm is about 7,000 wafers. So 1,000 is only about 15%. That small number really points to a very cautious approach from Qualcomm, like they're hedging their bets, maybe dipping a toe in, not diving headfirst.
Testing the waters, maybe?
It could be. Perhaps using Samsung as a testbed for this new tech, maybe for bigger orders down the line if it works out. Now, let's zoom out a bit. Look at the whole semiconductor foundry market. TSMC's market share is just staggering, 67.6% globally.
Wow, over 2/3.
Yeah. And Samsung Foundry, they control about 7.7%, much smaller. A few years back, it really looked like Samsung might seriously challenge TSMC, but, well, persistent yield issues, some delivery problems with big clients like NVIDIA and AMD, that kind of dashed those hopes for now. It pushed a lot of business back towards TSMC.
The market share difference is incredible.
Yeah.
But isn't relying so heavily on just one company, even one as good as TSMC, also kind of a risk for the whole industry? What if TSMC hits a snag?
That is absolutely the sort of hidden worry in the background.
Yes.
And it's why even a relatively small, maybe symbolic order from a giant like Qualcomm for a super advanced project like this, it's actually a really big win for Samsung Foundry. It's a chance for them to prove themselves, to hone their tech, streamline their processes, build credibility, get real-world data on this 2nm GAA. Every project like this helps them iron out the kinks and strengthens their hand when they negotiate against TSMC. They need these kinds of projects, even smaller ones, to show they can deliver at the cutting edge.
Okay, so this brings us back to the critical question for you, the person buying the phone.
Yeah.
How do these boardroom deals actually affect your experience? Theoretically, Samsung has an advantage, right? They make the phone and potentially the chip. That vertical integration should allow for better optimization, battery life, performance tuning.
Being the operative word.
Exactly. Because history gives us a bit of a warning here. Remember the old days with Galaxy phones? Some regions got Samsung's own Exynos chips, others got Snapdragon.
Oh yeah, chip. Right. It often led to consumer frustration because there were sometimes noticeable differences in performance or battery life between the two versions of the same phone. People remember that. They compare benchmarks online.
Definitely. So Samsung really has to make sure, if they do ship phones with both TSMC and Samsung-made chips this time, that any differences are basically invisible to the user. They absolutely need to avoid that kind of consumer backlash again. There's also this sort of unofficial expectation floating around that maybe the Samsung-made processor variant could be cheaper to produce for Qualcomm and maybe for Samsung Electronics too.
Interesting point.
Which, might lead to a slightly cheaper phone overall. Or maybe Samsung reinvests those savings into other features. Better cameras, more RAM, improved software, something else to make the Ultra stand out.
And zooming out even further, you just can't ignore the geopolitics here. These trade dynamics between the US, Taiwan, South Korea, China, they're always humming in the background. The world's most advanced chip factories are concentrated in East Asia, so any little diplomatic tremor, any supply chain disruption, it can ripple outwards and potentially mess with the production of the phones and computers we all depend on. It's not just business strategy, it's global stability too.
Okay, so where do things stand right now? We're talking late July, early August, 2025. The bottom line is, there's still no definitive official announcement from Qualcomm about the final plan for the Snapdragon 8 Elite Generation 2's main production run. It's still kind of up in the air.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating about the semiconductor world is how these massive decisions often get made really late in the game. It only happens after just exhaustive engineering work, tons of pilot runs on the factory floor, and really deep, complex financial modeling. They literally wait until they have data from test chips, analyze performance, analyze yields, analyze costs, before they fully commit to volume production. It's that close to the wire.
But we do know the big reveal is still planned for September 2025. Qualcomm's usual big launch event in Hawaii.
Right. The Snapdragon Summit.
That's where everyone, analysts, tech media enthusiasts like you, will be glued to the screens. We'll be looking for confirmation who's making the chip, what are the final specs, any hints about performance differences between potential S26 Ultra models. That keynote is going to be huge.
Absolutely. All eyes will be on that announcement.
So let's try and wrap this up. The core dilemma for Qualcomm seems pretty clear. Do they trust TSMC's proven, reliable, but probably more expensive 3-nanometer process? Or do they take another gamble on Samsung's super ambitious but maybe still inconsistent 2-nanometer GAA manufacturing?
And Samsung, meanwhile, they're pushing hard. They are now officially in production with these advanced 2-nanometer GAA chips. That's a milestone. But they likely haven't yet hit those really high, stable yields you need for massive volume, cost-effective delivery. Not at the level TSMC operates at for its mature nodes anyway. They're still climbing that ramp.
And for you, the smartphone buyer, at the end of the day, it boils down to something simple. You expect consistent performance. You expect reliability, good battery life. Yeah, and you expect that no matter who physically etched the silicon inside your phone. In this era where manufacturing might be split, brands like Samsung and Qualcomm are really going to be judged on their transparency and, crucially, on their ability to deliver that consistent experience.
Yeah, definitely. And here's maybe a final thought to chew on. This whole saga, the Galaxy S26, the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2, the entire semiconductor market is watching intently. This fierce competition between TSMC and Samsung, the billions and billions being poured into R&D and new fabs, it undoubtedly pushes technology forward. And ideally, that leads to better choices, better capabilities for all of us around the world. What comes next from this competition? Well, that's going to be fascinating to watch.
Subscribe. New Deep Dive. Subscribe. New Deep Dive.